This is such a, I want to thank Sierra as always for doing such a good job with these webinars. Thank Mary in absentia for her good work in putting together what is really going to be, I think, a terrific session. We have terrific guests today and a topic that is right at the core of what has been animating all of our work through these webinars over the past few years. I think maybe I should do some of what Mary was going to do and introduce our guests today, which I was not going to do. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll get into this. And if Mary is able to join us, then we'll have her speak as well. Okay, so here's what we're going to start with. We have Sean Reardon from who's a professor at the Stanford Graduate School of Education, where he directs the Educational Opportunity Project, and he's developed the Stanford Education Data Archive, containing 500 million 3rd to 8th grade standardized test scores for assessing educational opportunity nationwide. Sean's done a lot of work with Tom Kane from Harvard, who is also with us today. He is the Walter H. Gale Professor of Education and Economics at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the founder of the Center for Education Policy Research at Harvard. He served I get to say this, just a few years ago, he served as a senior economist in President Clinton's Council on Economic Advisors. And I'm chuckling because I too worked in the Clinton administration, which was not just a few years ago. Then we're going to be joined by a group of distinguished leading superintendents who are going to help us illuminate what they've been doing to drive academic recovery. So let me click through those. Adrienne Battle is a superintendent at Metro Nashville Public Schools. She spent almost her entire career in that school district, from teacher to various leadership roles at the district level, school and district level, and then to become superintendent. In addition, we have Mark Sullivan, who's the superintendent of schools in Birmingham, Alabama. He spent his entire career with the Birmingham City Schools and is a veteran of the U.S. Navy. Tony Watlington, who is the superintendent of the School District of Philadelphia, is our last superintendent guest. Tony joined the Philadelphia School District in 2022, and prior to that, he served as superintendent of the Rowan Salisbury Schools in North Carolina. After we talk with our superintendents, we have Susana Cordova, who is the Commissioner of Education in Colorado, having also served as superintendent in Denver and assistant superintendent or deputy superintendent, Susanna will tell me which one, in Dallas. And finally, at about 3:45 this afternoon Eastern time, we'll be joined by Adam Schott from the U.S. Department of Education, where he is the Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education. He too is from Pennsylvania, so we might get a little overexcited about Pennsylvania today. So thanks so much. I've been on a little hiatus for a while, and so it's exciting to be back for this session. I have several sessions in the remainder of April, so you may see a lot of me, or I get to see a lot of you. Let us start with Sean and Tom, if we can. Can you guys join us? Thanks so much. There you are. So we got Stanford and Harvard here. We're really struggling on the academic side. And I will tell you, I could fanboy these guys for a while, but I'm also going to guess that we can spend our time perhaps a tiny bit more productively than me just getting autographs on Zoom. Our goal for the first part of this conversation is to get a clear picture of what the two of you found in your Education Recovery Scorecard. Specifically, let's do two things if we can to start. One, we're interested in your general findings about academic recovery. And then two, your observations about how those findings apply to different population groups. Then we're going to get to what do we do about all that? How do we think about that, and what do we do about that? But Sean, I think you're going to kick us off with a little flyover of the findings general and then specific when we get to questions of populations.
Great. Welcome, everyone. It's nice to be here. I'm going to take John's first two questions and tell you what we found. So Tom and I and some colleagues collected data from 30 different states, all the districts in those states, to try to look at the patterns of learning loss during the pandemic and recovery in the first year post-pandemic from 22 to 23. There's sort of two main findings, sort of a good news, bad news story. So the good news story is this. I mean, it's not great news, but it's better than we thought it might be. These pictures show the trend in national test scores from 2009 to 2023. And we highlight here the period during the pandemic and then the post-pandemic period. And so you can see that during the pandemic, test scores in math and reading fell substantially by about a half grade level in math and by about a third of a grade level in reading. But then in the year from 22 to 23, we saw a recovery that was about 1/3 of the decline was gained back in math, and about 1/4 of the decline was gained back in reading. Now, those gains obviously didn't get us all the way back to where we were in 2019, much less, making further progress than that. But I think it's important to note they are large gains by historical standards. So if you went all the way back to 1991, when we start to first have this NAEP test, there was a period from 91 to 2013 where test scores went up very rapidly for a long time. But the annual rate of gain from 22 to 23 was as large or larger than any of the years during that period of rapid growth in NAEP test scores. So these are large by historical standards, and suggests that our schools, our teachers, our principals really made a difference in that year in improving outcomes for kids and helping them get closer to being back on track. So obviously there's still a bunch to do. Now that's sort of the good news, as it were, that there's been some significant recovery. The less good news is what happened to the patterns of educational inequality during the pandemic. So when we look, instead of looking nationally, if we then look district by district, and we categorize districts by their free lunch eligibility rate. So I've sort of 10 buckets of districts, from those with 0 to 10% free lunch eligible students to those with 90 to 100%. And when we look first at the decline in scores from 2019 to 2022, so during the pandemic, we see that the declines were not evenly distributed across those districts. The most affluent districts, those with very low free lunch eligibility rates, had test score declines that were much less than the declines in the highest poverty districts. The high poverty districts lost almost 3/4 of a grade level in math, compared to about 1/3 of a grade level for the most affluent districts. Similar trend in reading. So on average, there was about this half grade level decline in math, but that was much more pronounced in the poor districts than the not poor districts. So inequality between districts widened during the pandemic as a result. When we then look at what happened in the recovery year, the first year after the pandemic, this light blue arrow now shows how much recovery districts made on average in each of those 10 buckets of free lunch eligibility. You can see that gains were made pretty much in every category of free lunch eligibility. So the affluent districts made up some ground, the poorest districts made up some ground. But that ground that was made up was not enough to undo the inequality that was exacerbated during the pandemic. So the highest poverty districts are still well behind where the lowest poverty districts are. In fact, in reading, the low poverty districts have now on average more than caught up to where they were in 2019, while the highest poverty districts are still about 1/4 of a grade level behind. And in math, you have a pretty similar story. So that's sort of shows us.
Sean, one sec. The first column, the 0 to 10 in reading, has shot up above the line. Is that suggest that a level of intensity in instruction and attention in this 1 year has more than corrected for and actually accelerated learning in those districts?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, learning didn't decline by that much in those districts. It only went down, scores only went down by about a tenth of a grade level.
Yeah. Okay.
But and that was over 3 years. So in the 1 year post-pandemic, scores went up more than they went down over that 3 year period. So,
Hmm.
whether that was changes in instruction or kind of different things that parents were able to provide, we don't know exactly the cause of that. It probably wasn't the ESSER funds because those districts got very little extra
Right.
funds through ESSER. But there may have been changes in instruction or additional tutoring or extra school time, as many districts did,
Gotcha.
that led to that. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So the last thing I want to show you is what happened to the test score gap between poor and non-poor kids during the pandemic and in the period leading up to it. So here's a picture showing the trend in the achievement gap between poor and non-poor students, and we're measuring it here in grade levels. So back in 2009, the gap in math test scores was about two and a half grade levels or so. So that's a big gap. And you can see that gap has been widening up until about 2017 when it sort of flattened out. But during the pandemic, it widened a little bit, and then it widened a lot during the recovery. So what we saw in the data was that non-poor students, even in the same district as poor students, the non-poor students made up more ground than the free lunch eligible students in those districts. And so that suggests that that many districts weren't able to provide equal opportunities or equal extra resources for their poorest students as their non-poor students. And as a result, we see that in both math and reading, that achievement gap between poor and non-poor students grew substantially after the pandemic. And so we're now, in both subjects, the gap is now larger than it's been at any point in the last 15 years. And so that's the bad news. So in some, there's been substantial recovery. Many districts have really made a lot of progress, but inequality widened during the pandemic, and the recovery period hasn't been able to undo that extra inequality.
Well, that was
to you now, John.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. That was if something can be somewhat encouraging and somewhat sobering at the same time, I think you maybe captured that. Tom, when we talked before about this, you said that people had sort of accurately reported essentially what Sean just said to us, but that really part of what they missed was how much it's going to take, the scope and scale of what's required to actually get back on track, which, let's remember, we weren't thrilled with where we were before the pandemic, but to get back to where we were and get back in the right direction. Can you talk a little bit about how you see some of this scopes of how much we need to do?
Sure, John. Actually, I would highlight what I think are four main barriers to faster recovery.
Great.
So the first is just the rise in absenteeism that we saw during the pandemic that has remained stubbornly high afterwards. This chart, if we click, will just show that in California, this is just one state, but we see this in a number of states. The share of students who are chronically absent, basically doubled from the 18-19 school year so from pre-pandemic to the 22-23 school year. And the districts with the highest absenteeism rates during 22-23 had the smallest recovery. This is true
Yeah.
in California, but it seems to be true in many states around the country. The next challenge has to do with parents' perception of the achievement losses. So, you know, here are just two polls, but there have been a number of polls showing similar results. So that as of the August of 2022, only 9% of parents, so in the Education Next poll, reported that their child had lost ground and that they were concerned about whether or not they would catch up. 43% of parents perceived that their child had not lost any ground during the pandemic. And, you know, the reason why this is important is that if parents think things are fine, it's going to be hard for school superintendents to ask for the less politically popular things like increasing instructional time. A third challenge that districts have faced is that 90% of the money went directly to school districts, where there was very little authority for states or even for the federal government to try to coordinate activities. And as a result, there was just huge variability in the losses and in the recovery. You know, so imagine if at the beginning of the pandemic, the federal government said that, you know, we're not going to try to develop a vaccine. Instead, we're going to distribute all the money to local public health authorities around the country. And so you guys decide if you want to give everybody an ivermectin shot, go ahead. If you want to, you know, hand out bottles of bleach, go ahead. But we could imagine what would have happened if the federal government had done that. Some communities would have figured it out and others wouldn't. Well, that's exactly what has been happening in K-12, that we've had 13,000 school districts around the country trying to figure out their own answers to the recovery, and some districts have had more success than others. A fourth challenge is, and this actually in some ways is the most important one. So could we move to the next slide, please? So I think we succeeded in getting the word out about the efficacy of interventions like high dosage tutoring. But we never succeeded, I don't think, in having people understand just what would be the scale of the effort required to make up for these losses. So in this worksheet, I just worked through one specific example where I say, okay, let's take the effect sizes from research and then let's multiply by the share of students who might be served by that. And then let's just add up like what the effect sizes would be. So this is just saying, even on paper, what would it take to recover from a sizable loss? So high dosage tutoring, so 3 sessions per week for a whole school year. That's, you know, 108 sessions. Most districts that we've seen are really struggling to come anywhere close to that. It's more like, you know, 15 or 20 hours rather than over the course of a year, rather than the full 108. But suppose a district did that, and suppose they offered it to 10% of students. The pre-pandemic research suggested that if you did that, you'd get about a year's worth of improvement, and you multiply that by 10%, and it's, you know, 0.1 year. So you get a whole year's worth of growth, but just for 10% of your students, it's going to boost your district scores by 1/10 of a year. Say if the next intervention, double dose math, say on top of the tutoring, suppose you did double dose math with 30% of students got an extra period of math. There's some pre-pandemic research, mostly honestly in Algebra 1, that suggested you get about a half a year's worth of growth from that. So say we multiply that through 30% times half a year, 0.15 years. Say summer learning, there was a number of a few different studies actually that came out with similar results, that 6 weeks of summer school with 90 minutes of academic instruction per day would produce about a quarter of a year's worth of growth in math. Multiply that through, and then say on top of all, and say for summer school, say we achieved an unprecedented levels of student participation in summer school. Say we got 75% of students to show up for summer school, and say on top of that, we extended the school year by 2.5 weeks. If you did all of that, you'd get about a half a year, and you implement it in a way that you got about the same effect as the pre-pandemic research, you'd get about a half a year's worth of growth. Now, a number of districts are still over a grade level behind. Some are, 1.5 or 2 grade levels behind, and they would have to do this kind of thing for multiple years. And one of the challenges is trying to do that now that the federal aid is about to expire in September. So I hope over the coming months we can get a discussion going in states about what are the states going to do to continue the recovery, because I think even if what Sean was reporting before, between 22 and 23, districts made up 1/3 of the loss in math and 1/4 of the loss in reading. Even if districts kept up that rapid pace during this school year, and that's going to be hard to do because, as Sean was saying, those were historically large growth rates from 22 to 23. But say, even if they were able to do that again from 23 to 24, we would still be a year away from recovery for the average school district, much further than a year away in the districts that lost the most. And we'd still be 2 years away in reading. So that was with all of the federal resources paying for tutoring and after school and so forth. So it's really going to be critical what states decide to do. Do they step in and help continue the recovery after the federal dollars run out?
All right. Well, that was sobering. Sean got the happy part of the story, like it's possible. You got the unhappy and the speculation around what it would take, which is all pretty bracing stuff, which I think is actually your point. Like, this is pretty bracing stuff. And if we want to tackle this, it's going to take a level of seriousness, devotion, persistence over time. So our audience today and every Tuesday is made up largely of civic leaders and civic activists around the country who are devoted to early school success, as measured in part by how we do on 3rd grade reading scores. What's your hope about how people who are really leading the way in communities around the country, what's your hope about how they would metabolize this data and use this data to drive the kind of change that we're all looking for? Either one of you, Sean or Tom.
So, like, 3 things. Number one, we've got one more summer of the federal money. And so I hope districts sign up as many kids as possible for the summer. That might be involve telling parents if their child is below grade level and not wait for the state tests to come back later this summer. That, as we just saw, a lot of parents are under the false impression that everything's fine. And so it'll be necessary, I think, for teachers and schools to tell parents and then sign up for the summer. A second thing is the only way districts can use the federal money to extend the recovery into next year is if they set aside some of it for tutoring and after school contracts that are signed before September. They won't be able to use the money to pay their own employees' salaries after September due to federal budget rules, but they could use the money to pay contracts that were obligated before the end of September. And so that would be one way to use the federal money to extend the recovery. And a third thing is, I don't know, I feel like a lot of folks, at least here in Massachusetts, are sort of numb to test score as an outcome. But I think everybody understands the importance of attendance. So if we could do some public rallying, getting mayors, getting governors to help with reducing the absenteeism over the next couple of years, that could be the kind of thing that we could get some backing on. And I'm hoping that in just whatever we would have to do to solve the absenteeism issues, making school more engaging and so forth, building relationships would also help with some of the academic challenges. So that's those are three hopes.
Sean, you want to revise and extend Tom's remarks there, or
Yeah,
disagree with your colleague in public?
No, I always agree with Tom. So, but I would add one more piece, and that is, I think states are in a position to use the data they have, the kind of data we use for the Education Recovery Scorecard, to sort of figure out which districts in their state are really still well behind where they were, where they should be. And they're going to have to pick up the baton perhaps and provide some extra targeted resources to those districts once the ESSER money runs out. And I think that those kinds of efforts could be highly targeted because the data that states have tells them, as it told us, kind of which districts are most in need of additional resources or technical assistance, or things like that to help their students get back on track. And so I think there's a role for state departments of education to play in the next years.
Great.
So one pot of money, John, for doing what Sean was just talking about, that will still be there when the federal relief dollars run out, that many states are not tapping into, that they're able to use 3% of their Title I dollars for direct student services. And most states don't exercise that authority, but it's not a ton of money. But 3% of Title I states could set aside and target for tutoring or after school for the students, as Sean was saying, who are furthest behind, and even targeted at the districts that are furthest behind.
Gotcha. I'm going to turn to our friends, the superintendents, in just a second, but can you guys just give us a little sneak preview of what you're looking at, what your next big research is? We're already hooked on your outcomes, and we need to see a little trailer of what's coming next, because I know we're having you back.
So
Sean, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah. So here are two things that we think are going to be next. One is we hope to do this again in 24, so that the next NAEP comes out in December 24. And we're hoping at that time to add back in almost all the states. So this report, we were limited to the 30 states that had not changed their test since 2022. But with the new data, we'll be able to add back in any state we could use. Last time we had the NAEP data, we were able to do 42 districts in 42 states. But a second thing is we're also doing some work on trying to say something about what was the effect of the ESSER dollars on ESSER spending on growth in different districts. That's complicated by the fact that a lot of the ESSER dollars was concentrated, they were distributed on the basis of district poverty. And so it's hard to sort out what was the effect of the spending versus what was the effect of district poverty. But we have some ideas about ways we could try to come up with some estimates of that we're working on.
Great. And Sean, anything else you want to add?
No, I think those are the next two big things on our shared docket. I think the ESSER dollars, as Tom was saying, they couldn't have been responsible for all of the recovery, because in the lowest poverty districts, they really got almost no extra money through ESSER, but they saw, in many cases, the same size recovery as we saw in the poor districts that did get a lot of money. But it's quite possible that the poor districts would have not made as much progress in the absence of the ESSER money. And we're trying to tease out how much of that recovery was due to the ESSER dollars, because I think that will help inform states, superintendents, federal government to sort of think about what might be a useful way to think about allocating new resources going forward.
Gotcha. Well, thanks so much to both of you. I know both of you have classes and you have to go at different times, but I hope you'll stick around as long as you can. And now I'm going to ask our friends, the superintendents, to join us. So Adrian, Mark, and Tony, can you come on screen? Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Thanks so much. It's great to see all of you. Adrian and Tony, you guys were featured as districts who, part of a small cohort of major urban districts who actually did better than expected in recovery. The New York Times said you had above average recoveries based on the 2022-2023 school year. I'm really curious, and I know everybody on this session is curious, like, what strategies did you guys use that produced these results? Adrian, let's start with you. And by the way, if you have any observations or responses to what Sean and Tom just reported, happy to hear that as well, of course, to knit these conversations together.
Yes, happy to do so. Again, Adrian Battle, Metro Nashville Public Schools. I think the thing I'll say is when Sean and Tom share results and observations, as educators and leaders, we dig in and we respond to that. They are very trusted in our field, and we're definitely always paying attention to their studies, because school districts all across the country had a pretty good idea for their local context. And maybe even their state context. What we were not privy to is how we were situated in a national context. This particular study really helped us understand where our key levers were, and quite frankly, pushed us to think critically about where we were, the strategies we were leveraging, and our plans for the future. And so I just wanted to make sure we acknowledged the experts we had on this call, and of course my colleagues that are leading great work across the country. Metro Nashville Public Schools was in a little bit of a different situation, I think. I'm going to listen to my colleagues and learn from them as well. But we were on this journey before the pandemic of having really transparent conversations in our community. I mean, we were not happy with where we were before the pandemic. And so we were trying to create conditions in our own community around where we were and our sense of urgency to get our students up to par and making sure that their talents, their skills are really represented in the assessments that we use today. And so we launched a few months before the pandemic an initiative in Nashville called Metro Schools Reimagined, which really called on the entire city to be a part of the conversation. And our district and our leaders being able to identify research-based practices, strategies that had been long proven to help accelerate student outcomes and to address some of the student gaps that were represented earlier on the slides. And we knew that there is no conversation here without the commitment of our educators and our students and our families and our community at large. But we knew we needed to do something different. So we knew in the spirit of equity and outcomes, we had to get at a few of those strategies. So when the pandemic hit, our challenge wasn't necessarily how we were going to engage our students, what we were going to engage them in, but how we were going to do it, because we were all shifting to the virtual space for quite some time. But like many of the strategies that were already mentioned, we focused our efforts on doubling down on our Tier 1 instruction, adopting high quality instructional materials. If you just went down the list, high dosage tutoring, and yes, we were one of those districts who went for the gold standard and providing high quality tutoring for our students, 30 minutes, 3 times a week during the school day. You name it. When you think about expanding wraparound services, mental health supports, we're a district that spiraled our ESSER funds, a good amount of our ESSER funds directly to our schools. So that our school teams and our families could identify what the specific and unique needs were for our students. We launched a leadership framework. We extended the school day, family engagement, no-cost meals, summer learning, like all those key strategies, right? Because our commitment was that we were not going to return after the pandemic just to get back to normal. I mean, normal was not working well for the students in Nashville. Yeah. We wanted to come out of the pandemic stronger and better than before. So that was our commitment. And while we really stuck to that Metro Schools Reimagined plan, one thing that happened in Nashville was that we had a devastating tornado just about a week before we shuttered our doors as a result of the disruptions caused by the pandemic. But we already knew one thing. I mean, the tornado really exemplified this for us, but we knew that as a school system, we should not and could not go at this work alone. And so we really worked with our community to rally around our school district and our students. Schools alone will not be able to sustain the level of acceleration that was represented in this study or any previous studies. It requires all of us to really plug in. So we knew that. And so we created various avenues for garnering feedback from all of our stakeholders, our students, our parents, our family units, our educators. And we asked them, what do we need to know as educators and as a school district right now to make sure, one, that we have built strong, trusting relationships in our ability to respond to the disruptions caused by the pandemic, and that we were committed to getting things done. And we really want to validate for our community that we were hearing them, we were listening, and we were going to be responsive. And what came out of that for Nashville was our current mantra, which is every student know. After listening for hours and days and going through their feedback, what I heard from our stakeholders is that our families wanted to be confident that we understood the disruption caused, and that we were clear about how we were going to support our students and our families where they were, giving our teachers and our educators what they needed to pour into our students. And so we launched our mantra of every student known. It's not just about knowing students' names. It's about our students knowing that they're supported, that they're cared for, that they're valued. And regardless of the disruptions caused by the pandemic, they are on a path towards success. And so we've moved forward with that. We have called upon our wonderful school board. They have been so effective and impactful with the direction of our school district. We called on our mayor, our city council, all of our business leaders to be a part of this. And the pandemic really helped us become crystal clear about how all of our stakeholders can play an impactful role in student acceleration and in their growth. We renamed our central office as a support hub. That came clear out of that every student known. We're a support hub. We're here to support our students, our educators, our families in this work. We launched a peer partnership with Vanderbilt University because we wanted to be transparent with our community. We are leveraging, we received around $423 million. We wanted to be responsible and accountable to those funds. And so we leveraged, launched a peer partnership with Vanderbilt University. And they have been alongside us all along the way, evaluating those strategies, launching rapid response teams to help us adjust and make tweaks along the way. So we're not 3 to 5 years down the road, still trying to get it right for our students. And then lastly, one of the things I'll mention through communication and just transparency and the return on investment, we launched what we consider our personalized student dashboard, where our families, our educators have 24/7 access to see not district level, not school level, but individual student level goals and their progress. So we can progress monitor that on any given day in any given conversation. And we've really trained our educators around how to leverage that dashboard and how to engage with families and students and others as needed to make sure that we're being intentional as possible. My experience has been until you can drill down to the individual student level, it's going to be hard to move the needle
For sure,
for
for sure.
growth or achievement.
Is so impressive. I want to come back to some of the community stuff, since most of the people who are who participate in these calls every week are really community leaders who are thinking about how they can both help, support, hold accountable, everything, educational leaders. We're going to hear in a minute from Mark about how he got held accountable, which is an amusing story. But first, let's Tony, you too were in the category of Adrian of having some pretty noticeable success in Philadelphia, which is not necessarily a district that people associate with notable success. So what were your keys there?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. I'm certainly grateful to the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. You were great partners with us in the district I led in North Carolina. So as you said, Philadelphia is a very special place, 6th largest city in the country, 8th largest school district with some 197,000 plus students in the traditional public and charter schools. And it's often referred to as the nation's largest poor city. And so we're moving with a fierce sense of urgency in Philadelphia, because when you think about this being the birthplace of democracy with the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution being signed here, the first capital, the unfinished work of that is really educating all of our children. I want to make a quick comment about what you said, or what Dr. Kane said earlier about one of the barriers being that 90% of the ESSER dollars went directly to local districts. And when I think about the founders of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, that 10th Amendment, which left those powers not given to the federal government, left to the states, I think it has huge implications for what's happening right now in terms of the wide variance in how we do education across 50 states and 14,000 public school districts. I think that's part of our problem, is because we don't get the economies of scale in driving those dollars strategically. I will tell you that this is a district that has made strong, good investments with those ESSER dollars that came to this district. This district received some $1.2 billion. Certainly my predecessor, Dr. Bill Hite, myself, and the board have worked really hard to do that. A couple of things I'll say. First, we had a very thoughtful, was fortunate to work with some very smart people here to have a thoughtful entry into the district with a very robust listening and learning tour, a very well prepared position transition team that led to the development of a 5-year district strategic plan entitled Accelerate Philly. And it's all about a keen sense of urgency. What's different about our plan is everything we do, we're holding ourselves accountable to look at what the research tells us works and doesn't work under certain conditions. And number 2, we're looking at the return on investment for every dollar we spend. Now, last school year, we focused on 4 conditions for success that we knew we'd have to really get better at in order to accelerate achievement. Number 1, consistent with the first barrier with chronic absenteeism, we focus intensely on improving student regular attendance, meaning the students in our district who attend school 90% of the month. This is so important in Philadelphia because across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, 82% of the kids in Pennsylvania across race, ethnicity, gender, et cetera, attend school 90% of the year. Historically, that's been 57% in Philadelphia. Last year, we were to kick that up to 60%, which is a 3 percentage point increase. We also focus intensely on improving teacher regular attendance. The percentage of our teachers who were in school 90% of the year increased from 77 to 84%, a 7 percentage point increase. So important because no matter how much tutoring, mentoring, support services we bring into schools, there's no substitute for the number one factor: highly qualified, well-supported, stable teaching faculty over time. The third thing we focused on was making sure to focus on our ninth grade on track work in partnership with the Newbauer Family Foundation. The 4-year cohort graduation rate increased by 3 percentage points from 71 to 74%. We've got a lot of work to do in Philadelphia, and we're sure bent on doing it. And equally important, we not only focused on our kids being in school, teacher attendance, student attendance, our graduation rate, we focused intensely on our dropout numbers. Last year, we had 265 less students dropped out of school. So far this year, we have well over 1,100 less dropouts. This is a city where on average about 4,000 kids drop out of school every year. And we know the cost to the city and to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is $405,000 based upon a local study that was done a few years ago. Now, in terms of after we meet those initial floor strategy conditions, improve student attendance, teacher attendance, get the dropouts rate down and the 4-year cohort graduate up by intense focus, we've identified 5 things in our strategic plan, Accelerate Philly, and we align all of our resources, our time, our budgets, regardless of funding stream, and our professional learning to these 5 levers. Number 1, highly qualified, well-supported, stable teachers. We've invested more in professional development, and we've been really focused on this notion that in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, there's been a 71% decline in teacher certifications offered in this state, awarded in this state in the public and private universities.
Wow.
Compared to 50% reduction nationally. So the question becomes, who gets the certified teachers? Are the certified teachers better than non-certified? And how do we help fill that void in terms of teacher quality? So we focused there, number 1, more important than class size, more important than tutoring, mentoring. Certainly, although we certainly are pursuing high impact tutoring as well. Number 2, the same is true for the number 2 factor based on 50 years of research. I'm sure our Harvard and Stanford professors can attest to this. Is number 2 is the principal, highly qualified, well-supported principals over time. 3, we really focused in on the curriculum, particularly in math and also in reading, because what our kids learn and how they learn it matters. We've contracted, we've looked at the research from Ed Reports so that we can ensure that all the children across Philadelphia, the nation's largest poor city, have the very best math curriculum that exists in the country. And so we've selected a vendor, the same, our kids are now learning the same math that kids in Singapore have an opportunity to do. And I think that's really significant. And one of the best investments we've made with that $1.2 billion in ESSER funding. Our vice president was here yesterday, and we thanked her and President Biden for having the courage to get that money out to districts. Outside of those first 3 areas, highly qualified teachers, highly qualified principals, the curriculum. 4, we're focused in last year intently on making sure that all of the instruction that our students receive is rigorous, and that they experience grade level standards for part of the day, because we know that we cannot remediate our way to excellence.
Yeah.
And then finally, number 5, we've focused on partnering with our parents and caregivers as equal partners because they're our children's first teachers. I do want to show 2 quick slides if it's possible.
Please, and then we'll go to Mark. Thanks.
Really quick, the 2 slides I'll just show. We looked at, thanks to the Education Recovery Scorecard, we looked at the School District of Philadelphia's performance relative to the other NAEP tutor, large NAEP tutor districts.
Mhm.
I understand from the professors that in order to be in the study, we could not have changed the test, and we had to test 95% of our students. Philadelphia had the best rebound performance among the featured large NAEP tutor districts in 3 through 8 math. And on the second slide, Chicago Public Schools certainly had the best reading rebound performance on the next slide. Philadelphia was, School District Philadelphia was number 2. So we're looking forward to continuing to focus on those 5 high levers. And we look forward to learning from your research as well. And I thank you for the opportunity to participate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Mark, thanks for joining us. Just to remind people, Mark's from Birmingham. You took a slightly different approach, and you had a lot of interesting, sometimes maybe exciting interaction with the community in the course of that. So tell us a little bit about what your scheme was for accelerating reading recovery in a very high poverty school district in Birmingham.
So first, let me thank you for giving me an opportunity to come and share some of the great things that are happening that we're doing in Birmingham City Schools. As my colleagues indicated, there are a lot of ways to really address learning loss, but you really have to stay focused on Tier 1 instruction and ensuring that students are getting standards-based instruction. One of the things that we did coming out of the pandemic, because we were virtual and we were blended, we knew that our scores when the test was taken would not be, would reflect students in a virtual environment. And that happened. Our reading scores were not what we wanted them to be. They really weren't what we wanted them to be prior to the pandemic, and our math scores took a devastating hit. And so one of the things that, and I remember having a conversation with my academic officer, Dr. Jermaine Dawson at the time, and he said he has been a COVID officer instead of an academic officer, and now starting to come back to school, he can be an actual academic officer. But one of the things I said was, you know, we only have 180 days of instruction for students, and I wanted to push that closer to 200 days of instruction so that our kids will have, because what we find looking at our data is that when our students are with us, they learn. Our growth is through the roof. What our problem is our achievement and students being proficient on grade level. So what we wanted to do was provide more instructional days so that we can get closer to proficiency. And so I proposed a year-round calendar, having kids come back, our students coming back in July of that 2021 year.
And everybody in the community stood up and gave you a rousing standing ovation, right?
I could get a free meal in any restaurant in Birmingham. No. And so I shared it with my school board at the time, and it was a no. And I shared it with the teachers. They were no. The unions were no. Parents were no. And like I said before, the students were HE double hockey sticks no. So what we did was we compromised. We said, okay, we'll have breaks within the school year to reduce that large summer break. And so we had students attend school for 9 weeks, and then we had a week off. And during that week off, we called it an intersession. And so we had literacy camps, we had numeracy camps, we had enrichment, we had credit recovery, we had ACT, we had coding, theater camps. And so it was an opportunity for us to provide learning and really be specific to the needs of individual students. So the first time we did it, we had about 1,800 students out of 20,000 to attend. And I thought, well, man, this is really not successful. You know, maybe some of this was correct. But by the time we got to the spring of that year, we had 5,000 students, 1/4 of our students in school when they didn't have to be. And then by that summer, we had about 10,000 students participating in extended summer learning. When we came around to the fall of this year, we had 7,000 students in school when they didn't have to be. And so we've seen the growth from that, but that's only part of it. You know, I saw where was mentioned earlier by Tom around tutoring. We partnered with all 6 universities in our local area to provide tutoring in all of our schools 3 days a week. We also have tutors through STAIR, which is a program here in Birmingham, as well as Better Basics. we partnered with another organization, ESS, to provide paraprofessionals in every classroom, kindergarten through third grade, so we can provide more individualized instruction. And so we, one, made sure that teachers had the skills in order to teach on grade level tier 1 instruction, and then also had the skills when students are not on grade level. So how do we provide enrichment, remediation for those students and be able to scale those students up so that they can become on grade level? So we did a lot of things in Birmingham to really push the needle on academic achievement.
That's fantastic. I'm mindful of time. I have a million questions for all of you, but I'm mindful of time. So I want to ask Susanna Cordova and Adam Schott to join us. Just to remind folks, Susanna is the new Commissioner of Education, pretty new Commissioner of Education in Colorado, having served before in Colorado, in Denver. And Adam is with the Department of Education. And we've heard a fair amount in the course of this session about what states can do and about what the federal government can do. So now we're going to hear from a state, a great leader in a state, and from the federal government. Susanna, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Curious, just to give you a hot second to respond to anything that you wanted to from what Sean and Tom started us off with.
Sure. Like first and foremost, let me say I have so much respect and regard for the work that our superintendents are doing in the field.
Hear, hear.
And I come to the role of a state commissioner with a lot of humility about just how hard the job of being a superintendent is today, and how much effort I think really goes into creating the kind of conditions that will enable the kind of academic recovery that we're all searching for. So just really want to do a huge shout out to our superintendents who are in this call, and to all of the superintendents in my state who are really grappling with what it means to accelerate progress post-COVID. The thing that really struck me from the Colorado perspective, from what we heard from Tom and Sean, was like first and foremost, kids can't learn if they're not in school. And I would say that chronic absenteeism is a crisis. It's a national crisis. Colorado is a negative outlier. Our statewide absentee rate is over 31%. Colorado is somewhat unique in that we have 178 districts, and 124 of them use a 4-day school week, longer days, but a shorter week. And we have over 30 districts on a 4-day school week that have a chronic absentee rate above the state average. So that means out of their 140 days, kids are missing more than 14 days a year. And we will never, like, tutoring, summer school, none of that is gonna dig us out of the hole that we're digging deeper when we have a shorter calendar and kids aren't coming to school. So that really struck a resonant chord with me in terms of the work that we're doing here in Colorado to try to accelerate progress.
Susanna, we've been hearing about districts all through this conversation. How do you see the role of the state level and a state leader like yourself in helping districts to adopt the right strategies, stick to them, do a high quality job of implementation? How can states be helpful here? We know there's a lot of money in state capitals, but what else can you do?
Sure. I would say there really are a couple of ways that we're trying to approach it. And I have the maybe the benefit and the challenge of being new to state level work. And so I'm able to look at things with fresh eyes, and I probably don't know what I don't know. I keep every month thinking like, oh, 3 months ago, I should have done this thing. But one of the things I think that's most important that we can do inside the department is be as thoughtful and connected to the needs in the field that we can triangulate with data to make sure that the services that we're offering are as aligned to the needs that we see in the field. And I think that's probably a unique perspective that I bring having been a superintendent, which is, I say this all the time, like the work that's happening to educate kids is not happening at the State Department, it's happening in our districts. And we need to make sure that a plan on paper maps up to the reality in the field so that we can be as nimble as possible in terms of the kind of services that we provide when we have discretion within our agency. And like in the middle of this meeting, I was reaching out to my Title I team to say, hey, we've got 3% that we can use for high dosage tutoring. What are we doing with the funds that we have? And what would it
Excellent.
take to get
Excellent.
3% that we could set aside to help ameliorate the cliff that's coming through ESSER? So I think that's one of the things. It's like, how do we think as thoughtfully and strategically around the funding that we do have jurisdiction over. Colorado is a very local control state. And so I think it's also really important to think about the role of the state agency around both influence and guidance. That's influence around what's happening in legislation. That's influence and guidance around how once legislation is passed, how we shape and promulgate rules through our State Board of Education, and how we constantly are looking for those feedback loops to ensure that we are taking what is most effective out of research and figuring out how to apply it within the very unique contexts of Colorado districts. We have school districts that have as few as 35 students in Colorado,
Wow.
and as large as 89,000 students.
Wow.
So there's not going to be one solution that will work for
Yeah.
everybody. It's really
Right.
important to think about how to contextualize that.
Susanna, when we talked before, you mentioned that you just finished your doctorate. So congratulations from all of us on the call on that. That's a big
Thanks.
accomplishment. But you also talked to us a little bit about what your recommendations, what that research was and what your recommendations were coming out of it. And they just totally rang the bell for me. So I would be delighted if you could share them with our other guests and with our audience today.
Yeah, happy to do it. So the title of my dissertation is Redefining Success, looking at how we consider school improvement and school accountability systems post-COVID, and really trying to use qualitative research to give a window into the experiences of school districts as they seek to create more enabling conditions for student learning and how we think at the state level around accountability systems. My recommendations for what we should be doing inside schools is that we should be putting a greater emphasis on increasing real world and career focused learning experiences. It has such a tremendous draw for students. And anecdotally, what we hear is that kids who are disengaged from typical school actually are drawn into the opportunities when there's real world application.
Yeah.
That we need to recognize and reward anywhere, anytime learning. I think during COVID, we had countless examples of kids who were learning around the clock, submitting assignments in the middle of the night, not learning in school, but at home, in the community. Post-COVID, we come back and it's sort of like we're back to sitting in classrooms and talking about seat time and really trying to be thoughtful about how do we move away from a strict Carnegie unit approach to recognizing learning. And then the two final recommendations on enabling conditions are increasing student voice, choice, and agency, and promoting an environment of relationships and connections. When kids don't feel like they belong, it's so much harder for them to be able to want to come to school and to feel engaged, and increasing their opportunities for agency are such important ways to draw them into the learning environment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Adam, we're going to come to you in just one second, but before we let our superintendents and our superintendent emeritus, now state leader, go, look, we've talked at the campaign and in many of these sessions about creating favorable conditions for learning for every young person, sort of a watch phrase for us, favorable conditions for learning. We know that you all have such hard jobs, and we are this network of community coalitions, civic leaders. And I think part of the thing we want to know from you is how can community coalitions and civic leaders create the most favorable conditions for people in your seat to do the work that they need to do, which is not always glamorous, which doesn't always produce instant results, instant satisfaction, What advice would you give to the people on this call about how they can be most constructive? Adrian, you haven't been talking for a while, so I want to come back to you and hear from you. And your partly I want to start with you because so much of what you've done in Nashville, you've said I'm doing with the community, and that it's an all of the city effort, it's not the problem or the opportunity of the school district. It's everybody's problem, and it's everybody's challenge and everybody's opportunity. How do you think about how the kind of people who are on this call can be most helpful?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question, and one we've grappled with. You know, it's tough. I mean, we've had a city who, and I've said this ever since I've stepped foot in the superintendency, that I've been positively overwhelmed by support and everyone wanting to pitch in and rally. And we've done some very intentional work around minimizing random acts of kindness and support and partnership, and really trying to get all of our efforts pointing in the same direction. And so my greatest advice, I know in Nashville, we've launched what we call our focus outcomes. We've tried to create clarity around what it is we want for our young people, and how we can all play a part in that process and that progress. And so my advice to key partners and leaders and, you know, businesses and organizations is to rally around that intentional focus, of which we've definitely uncovered, if not anything else, around where we should be putting our effort, where we should be aligning our time, our talent, our treasure, to make sure our young people really can realize the promise that we have, and that's to deliver on a effective and quality public education experience for all of our students. And so I guess the takeaway here is just the coherence, the alignment, so that we have all arrows, all efforts pointing in the same direction.
Mark, I see you nodding your head over there, Mark. What do you
I
chime in?
would-
And you're a guy who perhaps got his rear end kicked a little bit. So I'm curious how you think about this.
I would totally agree with her. We are extremely blessed in Birmingham. We have a lot of nonprofits who really support our school district. The United Way of Central Alabama being one, who helped us with our high dose tutoring. I would say all school districts have a strategic plan. You know, having the community align their efforts to support those key indicators that school systems say this is what's going to move the needle on student achievement. And I think once we have a cohesive process where everybody's pushing in the same direction, I think we can have the outcome that we want to see in our community. And I'd also say for those community organizations to be an advocate for public education. I mean, public education in a lot of ways is under attack from a lot of different areas. I think advocating for public education, because the students that we serve, oftentimes we are the only line of defense for those students. They come from environments, some of them, that you could not imagine on your worst day. And we have to advocate for these students. We have to provide these students with the supports that they need in order to be successful. And that takes advocacy outside of the realm of K-12 public education.
Gotcha. Thank you, Mark. Tony, anything you want to add on this?
Yes, thank you. I'll just say three things pretty quickly. I'm going to
Great.
echo Mr. Sullivan in terms of advocating for school districts, public school districts, because in this partisan landscape we live in, public schools are under attack. There's no question about it. And certainly here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, there was a lawsuit, fair funding lawsuit recently, where the funding structure was ruled inherently unconstitutional by the Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania. And so I can't say enough about how we have to advocate for public schools and for appropriate funding. And we're committed in public school districts to showing the return on investment for the dollars we get, and we're being good stewards of public tax dollars. Number two, I would encourage everyone at the local and state level for sure to demand that we address this teacher pipeline problem. If we could figure out how to rebuild Western Europe after the Second World War, then we certainly can figure out how to develop a Marshall Plan. If highly qualified, well-supported, and stable teachers over time are the #1 factor not class size, not tutoring, not mentoring, then why can't we get our agency around rebuilding that pipeline? So we've got to make that a campaign issue, federal, state, and local level. And then finally, I would say we should get involved and help address this crisis of confidence. Our aspiration here in this school district is to be the fastest improving large urban district. And I guess I should apologize to Dr. Sullivan, since he's kind of gotten his butt kicked a couple of times, because I feel bad now that we hired his chief academic officer, Dr. Jermaine Dawson, as our deputy superintendent for academic. Hope we're still friends, sir.
I hope so. I hope so. That's fantastic. Tom Kane has to jump off in 1 second. And Tom, I just wanted to invite you back for a quick moment to see if you had any observations or reflections on what you've heard from these spectacular school leaders.
So one thing, first of all, thank you. You guys have been doing all the hard work these last few years, and Sean and I have been doing whatever we could to help highlight the progress you guys have made. So, and I hope we're able to continue to do that over the next couple of years. One point I wanted to mention is, like, we have done a terrible job as a field describing the progress that's been made since 1990. Somehow we have allowed a narrative to develop that public education is a quagmire and it's hopeless, when there really was dramatic progress between 1990 and 2013. The state of North Carolina, for instance, the average 8th grader in North Carolina improved by a whole standard deviation between 1990 and 2013. In other words, they moved the whole state by more than the black-white achievement gap was in 1990. And that story has not been told. And I honestly think that part of the reason why we've had a hard time getting governors and mayors and others jumping in right now that we need them to be helping continue the recovery is that we allowed this narrative to take hold. And it's affecting the political sphere. It's been affecting the philanthropy. And somehow we've got to change that, because while there definitely has been some backsliding since 2013, between 1990 and 2013, there were large improvements, and we don't talk enough about that.
That's great. That's really helpful. I appreciate that. And I know you have class, so we will excuse you for the rest of this class session. And thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you here again in the future. Adam, thanks for joining. I apologize for getting to you late, but I really appreciate your being here and love to hear a little about what you're seeing about across the country from places that are having more success, the kind of success that these superintendents are talking about, that Tom is pointing to.
Well, John, I'm sorry to join late. Thanks to you and to Mary and the campaign for convening the discussion, and to all the panelists. I want to say a special thank you to both to Sean and Tom. I think the work of the Education Recovery Scorecard has had particular resonance here at USDE. Number one, it's provided really powerful evidence to corroborate what we've been seeing and hearing as we pore over state assessment results, as we talk to state chiefs and district superintendents, as we analyze data on learning conditions through the school pulse panel. It is also the most significant piece of scholarship that looks at student performance in a comparable cross-state way from the years in which American Rescue Plan funds were flowing out to states and out to districts. So I think from that, it's really encouraging that we are seeing some of the rebound. And I think we also know that we have a lot further to go. I was on for just like the past 20 minutes, and I made all of these notes of the things I heard. And if this was also a class, it's certainly a graduate level course. I heard about the value of community partnerships when kids need more, not less. I heard the commissioner speak to the fact that every single goal we have for kids right now depends on them being back in school in a regular way. Like, we are not going to increase graduation rates. We're not going to close achievement gaps. We're not going to support English learners on their way to proficiency if students are not coming to school on a regular basis. That's a signal focus of the secretary right now. I also heard a lot of conversations about use of evidence and data to drive performance. And I think that is really important in at least two ways. I've heard Tom talk about this, both Tom and Sean. Like, we've got a moral and educational imperative to make sure that the interventions that we are deploying, that we know, are they working? Who are they working for? How can they work better? I think also right now in this moment, the states and the systems that are poised to continue to have success are the states that have the receipts in hand, that type of evidence that they can take to state policymakers and local policymakers. We have had 3.5 years of historic funding from the administration to states to support educational recovery. We also know, and I heard Dr. Watlington speak to this, state and local government, they've got to be ready to grab the baton. So we got schools back open. We got educators vaccinated. We've restored 99% of education jobs lost during the pandemic, record expansion of summer and after school and before school. And all these things matter. And I think every one of us knows that we're going to need to keep it up. We've got a long-term recovery ahead of us. And so we need a plan for 2024, 2025, 2026. And in this environment where it's difficult and it can be tense, and the ideology can be a lot for state and local leaders to work through, having that evidence in hand to say, this is working, this is worth continuing to invest in. And I think each of the superintendents and the commissioner have been tremendous leaders in making that case that we have got to continue the work of equitable, adequate funding past September 2024.
That's great, Adam. Thanks so much. I want to turn to a couple of questions that we have in from the audience. One of the questions, and I think this really goes to the superintendents especially, and to Susanna, is how do we keep our focus on resolving? Oh, there's our poll. So please fill this out. You can do it while you listen, I promise. Hang in there with us. How do we keep the focus on reducing these gaps, the inequality that Sean especially spoke to? That's hard work, and it's not always the results don't always show up fast. How do we keep our own focus of the community, focus of policymakers on closing those gaps? Susanna, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I think it's really important that we think about, like, how do we get the tension right between what it means to have like a support agenda, because people are not doing this because they don't care. It's like, we need to, particularly from a state agency, how do we support? But then how do we also use data to highlight where the problems are? And I think it's like getting that tension right, and not being so slack on that tension that nothing is happening, and not being so tight on that tension that the rubber band snaps and everything falls apart. And I think it's constantly working at like the support side and the highlighting the need side and toggling the tension.
That's really good. I would like to hear what the others have to say, but that really rang a bell with me. That we have to keep alive the sense of possibility, and also keep people focused on what a tough problem this is. Tony, how do you think about this question of keeping our focus on disparities in learning outcomes and closing those gaps?
No, absolutely. I think we have to be really focused in on the data, who benefits, who doesn't, under what conditions. I think it's absolutely essential. The worst thing we can do in this very partisan climate with the Harvard, UNC, Supreme Court ruling and the like is to take our eye off of looking at how our students are differently situated and how we have such disparate outcomes. I think sometimes I'm finding that there are educators who just say, I don't need any trouble. I'm going to take the middle path because like I'm catering to any particular interest group. And we've got to figure out how to do this and attack the data head on and not be colorblind and racial.
Gotcha. Mark, anything you want to add to what Tony just said?
I think Tony hit the nail on the head. Use the data. The data will drive the decisions that you make. And as he indicated, you have to really be able to focus on the individual needs of students. And I think if we do that, we can move the needle on academic achievement.
Adrian, anything you want to add to what everybody just said about keeping our focus on the disparities and closing those gaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's highlighted is intentionality, continuing to identify and eliminate any inequities that exist in our systems and across the country, and quite frankly, creating the conditions for us to have open dialogue and being transparent about where we are and not being afraid to celebrate the successes with where we are, but committing not to stay in that space. And so I think there's a good balance between recognizing and uplifting the great work and the progress, but knowing that we still have a lot of work ahead of us that needs to be accomplished.
John, may I just add one quick thing?
Of course you can.
We can certainly learn from each other. 2 summers ago, to that point, I was at Harvard University with my Board of Education here in Philly. And we studied the work with Commissioner Cordova and Tom Boasberg out there in Denver. And so we've got some good models of things that work and don't work. And I'm pleased to be able to learn from colleagues as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Curious for our superintendent friends about cross-agency partnerships, including partnerships with things like housing departments and so forth to support learning. Susanna talked about learning anytime, any place, which is certainly part of the credo of the campaign for grade level reading, but also formal partnerships across some of these agencies could be helpful. Have any of you pursued those kind of partnerships?
I'll say absolutely. We have worked with the Birmingham Housing Authority to address chronic absenteeism. We've reduced our percentage of students chronically absent by 20% over a year. What the Housing Authority is doing is providing incentives to parents who live in the public housing when their students have perfect attendance for a month or 2 months. Also providing supports through a partnership we call Helping Families. It's through the DA's office. It's not about punitively hurting parents whose children are not in school, but finding out those core reasons why parents are not bringing students to school. It could be homelessness, it could be the fact that those students don't have clothes at home. And so it's about building a network where we can meet the needs of those students and then provide them with the resources that they need in order to be successful. So we work with the Housing Authority, we work with the DA's office, we work with a lot of entities to try to provide those wraparound services for our students.
Adrian, I see you nodding your head, and then Adam, I'm coming to you to get the last word before I go to Mary. But I see you nodding your head, and I'm very attuned to your know every student motto there, and is so sympathetic to that. So tell me what you were thinking while Mark was just talking.
Very similar experience here in Nashville with MDHA, with Nashville Health, with Alignment Nashville, just helping us convene and provide services and supports to our families. I mean, we are in constant communication around affordable housing and housing opportunities for our families, particularly as we're trying to solve for chronic absenteeism and the transient rate of students within our district. And so it takes those strong partnerships. I will say it again. Districts, school leaders cannot and should not be in this work alone. It takes those partnerships in order to make sure our family units have what they need and that we're not just simply in isolation trying to solve for some of the opportunities that exist for the students we serve.
Amen. Tony, I know you want to jump in here before we get to Adam, so go ahead.
30 seconds or less. To piggyback on what Dr. Battle said, here in Philadelphia, we report out on our attendance for both teachers and students at every board meeting in a public meeting setting. Number 2, we're developing data sharing agreements with both the City of Philadelphia as well as the Philadelphia Housing Authority. Really significant when we work together.
That's fantastic. Adam, I just want to come to you for a little closing observation, and then we'll go to Mary to close us out.
No pressure, right?
No pressure, because it wasn't a field full of superstars or anything, but I wanted to come to you to close out.
No, I think I would just double click on the emphasis on community and partner engagement. When the American Rescue Plan funds started to flow, I mean, think about where we were at that moment in the pandemic. Given the allowability under the statute, we were not in a position to tell states and districts how to spend those resources. It broad allowability, and we could not take a time out to do a public comment rulemaking for 12 months before you could start to spend those resources.
Sure.
The thing that we required, the thing that the president and the secretary required, was to get every possible partner to the table for enacting those plans. Educators, labor, parents, tribal communities, every possible stakeholder at the table to invest those resources. And I think that the work that all the superintendents and the commissioners spoke about, we've got to stay in that habit. We've got to continue. We've got to keep that muscle memory of how we communicate around big things, big ideas. And each of you, it's such an inspiration to hear how you've been able to build those networks, including during an era of social distance when we couldn't get together in a physical space, how you built those systems, how you built those partnerships, and you've been keeping them going. We're going to continue to support that here from USDE, whether it's our investments in full service community schools to get more partners into our Title I schools, to provide medical screenings, to provide job training for parents, resume writing, good quality before and after school care. We're going to keep it up with the president's proposed investments in Title I, all the different policy levers we have to wrap good community partners around our kids during what we all know is a challenging time.
Wow. Thank you so much, Adam. And thanks for hopping on here. I really appreciate that. I just want to do like a tour around the country and get autographs from all of you guys. You guys are fantastic. This has been so stirring and so makes me feel so, serious and optimistic at the same time. Adrian, Mark, Tony, Susanna, Adam, fantastic. Tom and Sean both had to go teach classes, but they were great. This has just been really, really helpful. Mary Kingston Roach, this is the first one of these webinars that she's done. She crushed it, and then her internet went out. So I want to turn to Mary to close us out so she gets a little minute on this session too.
Thanks so much, John, and thank you so much to all of our amazing guests. You somehow were able to give us an honest look at things, but also give us optimism for what's working and what can work. So thank you so much. And I blame the internet crash on the post-eclipse. So if we can pull up the future webinar slide, and I can quickly walk through that. Great, thank you. So please join us again very soon. Starting next week, we have a great webinar all about chronic absenteeism and how to reduce that. So that was a big topic today. Come join us next week at 12:30 Eastern for that. Also in the same day, later that day, we have a session on how to really scale high impact tutoring, also building off this conversation today. And then the following week, the 23rd at 12:30 Eastern, a session on enhancing teaching and learning and scaling needed interventions. So it's like we plan this, everything from this conversation you'll learn more about. And then finally, 3 o'clock Eastern on April 30th, John and I are back to join you to talk about the $2 billion settlement out of California. And really, what are the lessons from that on how we can ensure accountability and equity as we look at our spending. So on behalf of John and myself and everyone on the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, we just want to thank you all so much for attending and to our amazing guests. And we look forward to seeing you very soon. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.